Burkina Faso's young leader Ibrahim Traoré has done what few expected. He stood firm against Donald Trump, rejecting a demand that 60% of the country's gold and oil be handed over. In a world where small nations are often pressured into submission by global powers, this defiance has stunned observers. Why would a leader risk isolation, sanctions, and possible retaliation by one of the world's most influential figures? And what does this bold rejection mean not only for Burkina Faso, but for the entire African continent? The confrontation did not arise out of thin air. For years, foreign powers have looked upon Burkina Faso's natural resources with unrelenting interest. Beneath its soil lie vast reserves of gold, the country's most valuable export, and more recently, the discovery of oil deposits has added a new dimension to its economic future. By some estimates, Burkina Faso is already one of the fastest-growing gold producers in Africa, yet its people have not seen the prosperity one might expect. The wealth flows outward, enriching corporations and foreign partners, while the local population continues to struggle with poverty and underdevelopment. When Trump's demand for a controlling share of both gold and oil came to light, it was not just an economic proposition. It was a stark reminder of how vulnerable smaller nations can be to the weight of global power. What makes Traoré's response so striking is not simply the refusal, but the manner in which he refused. He did not sidestep, he did not delay, and he did not soften his stance. His rejection was clear, emphatic, and broadcast to the world to hear. In that moment, he positioned himself not just as a leader of Burkina Faso, but as a symbol of a broader resistance taking root across Africa. His message was simple yet profound. The resources of his nation belong to its people, and no foreign leader has the right to dictate how they are used. This clarity of vision resonated with millions, not only within its borders, but across a continent that has long endured the weight of similar pressures. To fully understand the gravity of this confrontation, we must look at the history that brought Burkina Faso to this point. Like many African nations, Burkina Faso's relationship with its natural resources has been fraught with exploitation. During the colonial era, gold and other minerals were systematically extracted to enrich foreign empires. The infrastructure built in those years served the purpose of moving resources out of the country, not developing it from within. When independence came, the pattern did not disappear. It simply changed form. New agreements with multinational corporations replaced colonial mandates, but the results were similar. Enormous wealth extracted, minimal returns for people, and a cycle of dependency that kept the country vulnerable to outside influence. In this context, Trump's demand for 60% of gold and oil was not just outrageous, it was familiar. It echoed the same mindset that Africa has faced for centuries, the idea that its wealth exists for others to take, that its sovereignty can be bargained away, and that its leaders should accept such terms in exchange for survival. For generations, this pattern held true because the cost of saying no was often too high. Nations that resisted risked economic sanctions, military interventions, or covert destabilization. But Traoré's refusal marked a shift, a signal that a new era might be emerging in which African nations are no longer willing to be dictated to. The reaction among the people of Burkina Faso was telling. Far from fearing the consequences, many celebrated their leader's defiance. For a country long accustomed to seeing its wealth flow outward, the refusal was a moment of dignity and pride. It was a chance to see their leader stand up not only for sovereignty, but for the principle that the future of the nation must be decided at home, not abroad. This surge of support highlights an important truth. Political strength is not always measured by alliances with the powerful, but by the ability to reflect the will and aspirations of one's own people. Still, the challenges that follow such defiance are real. Burkina Faso is not a wealthy nation in terms of infrastructure or financial reserves. Its economy remains fragile, heavily dependent on agriculture and gold exports, and vulnerable to global market shifts. Standing against a powerful foreign leader brings with it risks that cannot be dismissed. There is a threat of reduced foreign investment, the danger of international isolation, and the possibility of punitive measures designed to pressure the country back into compliance. These are not small matters, and they will test the resilience of both leadership and people in the years to come. Yet therein lies the deeper significance of this moment. By rejecting the demand, Burkina Faso is not merely gambling with its future. It is asserting the principle that sovereignty is worth the risk. The question that lingers, the open loop that remains unresolved, is whether this bold stand will inspire others to follow, or whether the weight of global power will eventually force a retreat. Across Africa, leaders and citizens alike are watching closely, measuring what is possible, and asking themselves if they too can say no when faced with similar demands. The story is not finished, and that is what makes it so compelling. We do not yet know how the global stage will respond. Will there be retaliation? Will there be attempt to undermine Traoré's position from within? Or will this defiance spark a new wave of independence across the continent, redefining Africa's relationship with the rest of the world? Each possibility carries enormous consequences, and each adds to the tension that makes this moment one of the most pivotal in recent African history. When the rejection became known, the world did not respond with silence. Some analysts were quick to dismiss the statement as symbolic posturing, suggesting that a small nation could never afford to stand against such powerful pressure for long. Others, however, recognized something deeper, a moment of genuine rupture in the pattern of global relations that had long kept Africa on the defensive. For them, the refusal represented not only the courage of a single leader, but also the stirrings of a broader continental awakening, one that could not easily be ignored. The symbolism of this moment must not be underestimated. In the eyes of many Africans, the demand itself represented centuries of exploitation condensed into a single sentence. 60% of a country's gold and oil, the very lifeblood of an economy, to be handed over, as if sovereignty were a commodity to be traded. This was not simply an economic proposal. It was a continuation of an old story in which Africa's resources were viewed as spoils for others. The refusal, therefore, was more than defiance. It was an act of rewriting that story, of signaling that the days of unquestioned compliance may finally be drawing to a close. For the people of Burkina Faso, this was not merely a distant diplomatic affair. It touched directly on their daily lives. In villages near the mines, where gold has been extracted for decades, communities often see little benefit. Schools remain underfunded, healthcare facilities lack resources, and infrastructure struggles to keep pace with a growing population. Meanwhile, convoys of trucks carry tons of gold out of the country, destined for refineries and markets far beyond its borders. The stark contrast between the wealth extracted and the poverty left behind has long been a source of frustration and anger. When their leader said no to the demand, he was, in effect, giving voice to this long-simmering discontent. He was saying what many had whispered for years: enough is enough. But the refusal was also strategic. By taking such a bold stance, Burkina Faso positioned itself as more than a passive player in global politics. It placed itself at the center of a debate about how Africa should engage with the rest of the world. Should it continue to accept lopsided arrangements that enrich others at its expense? Or should it begin forging new paths, even at the risk of conflict? These questions are not academic. They are pressing realities that determine whether Africa's vast natural wealth will finally serve its own people or continue to fuel the prosperity of others. Of course, resistance comes with risks. The history of nations that dare to defy powerful interests is often marked by turmoil. Leaders who rejected external demands sometimes face coups, sanctions, or covert attempts to destabilize their governments. The awareness of this history hangs heavily over Burkina Faso's decision. Yet the very act of rejecting the demand indicates a willingness to bear those risks in pursuit of a greater goal, the right to determine one's own destiny. In that sense, the refusal is not reckless. It is deliberate, grounded in the belief that sovereignty is not negotiable. For those outside the continent, this moment serves as a mirror. It forces the question, why do demands like these still arise in the modern era? Why is it still assumed that a nation's resources can be claimed by others, as if independence were a formality rather than reality? The refusal challenges these assumptions, reminding the world that sovereignty is not symbolic. It is practical, tangible, and must be respected. Whether or not the global powers are ready to accept this reality will shape the future of international relations in profound ways. As the dust settled from the initial confrontation, the world began to speculate about what comes next. Would Burkina Faso face economic retaliation? Would aid be cut, investments withdrawn, or diplomatic pressure intensified? These questions remain unanswered, but the uncertainty itself is revealing. It demonstrates that the old playbook where defiance is immediately punished may not be as effective as it once was. The world is changing, and the tools of coercion are no longer guaranteed to achieve compliance. This creates space for smaller nations to maneuver, to assert themselves in ways that would have seemed impossible a generation ago. During the colonial era, the gold of Burkina Faso was not seen as a national treasure, but as a resource to feed the ambitions of an empire. The infrastructure built in those times was designed not to connect Burkinabe communities to one another, but to connect the mines to the ports, ensuring that raw materials could be shipped abroad as efficiently as possible. Roads, railways, and administrative structures served a singular purpose: extraction. The wealth generated flowed outward, while the people who labored in the mines and fields were left with little more than the remnants of a system designed to benefit others. Gold, which should have been a blessing, became a curse. Burkina Faso grew to become one of Africa's largest gold producers, yet the benefits were disproportionately captured by outsiders. Multinational mining companies established operations with agreements that favored their interests, securing tax breaks, export privileges, and control over the most lucrative veins. Local communities bore the environmental costs: poisoned water sources, scarred landscapes, and health problems linked to mining operations. Meanwhile, the wealth extracted enriched shareholders abroad, while leaving villages in the shadow of the mines struggling to survive. Oil, more recently discovered, threatened to follow the same pattern. For many in Burkina Faso, the discovery of oil was both a cause for hope and for fear. Hope, because it promised a new source of revenue that could transform the economy. Fear, because history suggested that new resources often attracted not prosperity, but interference. The experience of other nations loomed large. Countries where oil wealth led not to development but to corruption, conflict, and deeper dependency on foreign powers. This fear was not unfounded. For decades, Africa has been described in terms of the resource curse, a paradox in which nations rich in natural resources often suffer from slower economic growth, weaker institutions, and greater instability. Yet the story of exploitation is also a story of resistance. Burkina Faso has a history of leaders and movements that dare to challenge the status quo, even when the odds were against them. Time and again, voices arose to say that the wealth of the land must serve the people of the land. These efforts were not always successful, and in many cases they were met with fierce resistance from powerful interests both inside and outside the country. But they planted a seed, the idea that sovereignty is not just a political concept, but an economic one, that true independence requires control over the nation's resources. This seed has grown in recent years as the people of Burkina Faso, like many across Africa, have become increasingly vocal about the need to break free from exploitive arrangements. Civil society groups, youth movements, and ordinary citizens have demanded transparency in mining contracts, accountability from leaders, and a fairer share of the wealth that flows from their soil. These demands have created a political climate in which surrendering 60% of the nation's gold and oil was not only unacceptable, but unthinkable. Any leader who attempted to comply would have faced enormous backlash at home. The demand, then, collided not only with the will of a single leader, but with the collective determination of a people who have grown weary of exploitation. This explains why Traoré's rejection resonated so strongly. It was not an isolated act of defiance, disconnected from the lives of ordinary Burkinabe. It was the culmination of decades of frustration, resistance, and aspiration. It gave voice to a truth that many had long felt but had rarely seen expressed so clearly on the world stage. The tension between history and the present moment creates a powerful narrative arc. On one side lies the weight of centuries of exploitation, the deeply entrenched structures that have kept wealth flowing outward. On the other lies the possibility of a new future, in which nations like Burkina Faso reclaim control over their resources and redefine their place in the world. The confrontation with Trump's demand is thus more than a single political episode. It is the embodiment of this larger struggle, a crystallization of the choice between repeating history and breaking free from it. What makes this moment particularly compelling is its unpredictability. History would suggest that defiance leads to punishment, that powerful nations will not tolerate resistance from smaller ones. Yet the future is no longer as predictable as the past. New alliances are forming, new sources of support are emerging, and the balance of power is shifting in ways that open space for resistance. Burkina Faso's refusal may therefore mark not the beginning of punishment, but the beginning of transformation, both for the country itself and for the broader region. In the days that followed, the speech reverberated across Africa. Leaders in neighboring countries issued cautious statements, some supporting Burkina Faso's right to sovereignty, others carefully avoiding any alignment that might provoke backlash. Yet among ordinary Africans, the response was overwhelming. Social media buzzed with messages of solidarity, pride, and inspiration. Hashtags spread rapidly, celebrating the courage to stand up against what many described as modern-day imperialism. In marketplaces, in universities, and in remote villages, the story of Burkina Faso's defiance was retold with admiration and hope. This moment, this speech, and this defiance will be remembered not simply for what was said, but for what it represents. It represents the culmination of decades of frustration with exploitation, the resilience of a people unwilling to surrender their future, and the courage of leadership willing to speak truth to power. It represents a possibility of a new chapter in which sovereignty is not an empty word, but a living reality. And it represents a challenge to other African nations, to the global community, and to all who believe in justice to decide whether they will accept the continuation of the old patterns or whether they will join in forging something new. As the final words of the speech echoed in the hall, there was no mistaking the gravity of the moment. Burkina Faso had spoken, loudly and clearly, not only to Trump but to the world. The message was unambiguous. The wealth of the nation belongs to its people, and no demand, however forceful, will change that. In that declaration, Burkina Faso stepped out of the long shadow of exploitation and into the uncertain but empowering light of self-determination. The climax had been reached. The world had been told no. And now, the future remained an open question that would test the resilience of Burkina Faso, the integrity of international systems, and the courage of other nations to follow where one small but determined country had led. The refusal has already altered the narrative, but its true impact will unfold in the years ahead. In saying no to the demand, Burkina Faso did more than protect its gold and oil. It reshaped its identity on the global stage. For decades, the country had been viewed as a small, landlocked nation with limited influence. Today, it is seen as a symbol of defiance, as a place where a leader drew a line that others have been too cautious to draw. Whether that symbolism translates into lasting change will depend on what follows, but the significance of the moment cannot be undone. The implications for Africa are profound. For too long, the continent's vast resources have been spoken of as though they belong to the world rather than to the nations themselves. Conversations in global forums often framed African wealth as potential to be unlocked by foreign investors, rather than as birthright to be stewarded by Africans. Burkina Faso's rejection challenges that entire framing. It asserts that Africa is not a reservoir waiting to be tapped, but a collection of sovereign nations whose resources are theirs to manage, protect, and distribute. And now, the question extends to you. What do you make of this defiance? Do you see it as reckless, a gamble that risks too much for a fragile nation? Or do you see it as courageous, a necessary stand against centuries of exploitation that might inspire others to follow? The debate is not confined to the halls of power. It belongs to all of us. For in every refusal, in every act of resistance, lies a mirror that reflects our values, our assumptions, and our vision of what the world should be. If you believe this story matters, if you believe sovereignty, dignity, and fairness deserve to be discussed openly, then share your thoughts in the comments below. Join the conversation, because these are not issues for governments alone. They are questions of justice that touch us all. And if you want to explore more stories that reveal the hidden struggles, bold decisions, and transformative moments shaping our world, be sure to check out the other videos on this channel. The story of Burkina Faso is not over. The struggle continues, the risks remain, and the outcome is uncertain. But one thing is clear. The refusal to hand over 60% of its gold and oil has already changed the conversation. It has already inspired millions. And it has already proven that even in a world of unequal power, the courage to say no can resonate louder than the pressure to submit. The soil of Burkina Faso still holds its gold, its oil, and its promise. But more importantly, it now holds something greater, a vision of sovereignty, dignity, and independence that can never again be dismissed as impossible. The The world may challenge it, resist it, or even punish it, but it cannot erase it. For once spoken, once lived, once defended, sovereignty is a power that no demand can extinguish. And so the story continues not with silence, not with submission, but with defiance. The people of Burkina Faso stand at the edge of history, their will still in their hands, their dignity still intact, and their future still unwritten. The world watches, the continent listens, and we are left to wonder, what will they write on the next page?